What really makes a difference among individuals across the globe who profess to know God?
Professing to know God actually implies that their faith has been articulated somehow. I guess this means that they verbalize their allegiance to God. But of course, it doesn't mean that all who call themselves followers of Christ or sons of God are the same. That's rather unfortunate because it shouldn't be the case ideally. Matthew 15:8. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Those were the words of Jesus to the scribes and Pharisees.
Sure.
I mean, these guys are supposed to be the most respected of men, especially when it comes to the knowledge of God and service to Him. But Jesus referred to them as blind leaders, leading the blind, who will eventually fall into the ditch. So that further confirms that many may profess to know God, but are truly deceiving themselves. And the difference for me is what you really want from God. I also profess to know God, for instance, but I should be able to ask myself, Mofin Ifolua, what do you really want from God? Some people just want God for, to use Him for comfort, protection, elevation, fame, advancement, success, sound health, and the list goes on. Outside of all that, they don't need or want God for any other thing. And that's for real.
True.
And some people want God to cultivate a father-to-son relationship. Of course, that relationship may come with material benefits, but you care less about all that. Your allegiance to Him ain't affected, even in the dry and dark times. Because you can sacrifice anything just to see that God is pleased with you. I think that was actually the bone of contention on the subject of Job. Have you considered my servant Job and how upright he is? And Satan was more like, why won't he be upright? When you've done so much for him in terms of protection, position, promotions, provisions, just take them out and see if it won't cost you to your face. What a challenge that was. I wonder how Job survived actually. You see, many of us who declare our allegiance to God, we say we are Christians, we go to church, we attend church programs and the likes. Many of us, not all, are in it primarily because of what we want.
True.
What we want. I mean, those things that Job had before the dialogue that changed his life. And don't get me wrong, these benefits are from God for us to enjoy, but never meant to be the motivation of a true son.
Sure.
Can a father really feel good about a son who turns his back on him because he hasn't received the provision he's expecting? That's not a son, but a thug. So among those of us who profess to be children of God, we have sons, and we also have thugs. Sons want to cultivate a relationship with the father. Thugs only want to be there for the benefits. When Jesus was sought after by the multitude, what did they really want? Bread. Outside of that, they wanted nothing.
That's right.
Blind Bartimaeus cried, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus asked, what do you really want? And he said that I may receive my sight. That's healing. After that, I'm not sure he went back for insight. But Paul stated what he wanted in Philippians 3:10, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering, being made conformable unto his death. That's a son willing to suffer that the Father may be glorified. He had the thirst for relationship. The Father would be proud of such a son. It reminds me of the childhood experience I had with my earthly father. I think this must have been sometimes in 1999.
Okay.
Because I remember clearly I was in junior secondary school. My dad had told me that morning that he was going to give me a ride to school on his way to the office, instead of the usual practice of giving me some pocket money meant for transportation and some snack. I never really knew why until he gave me a 20 naira note. I remember so clearly. And that was not as much as what he usually gave me. So he explained to me that it was all he had at the time and promised to give me the balance when I returned from school. Being the first time I ever noticed that my dad didn't have cash on him, I was quite young. I then told him to keep the money with him, as I didn't want, I didn't want him to give me all he had on him.
That's right.
He initially refused, but in my own little way, I tried to persuade him that I had saved some money prior to that time with a classmate in school. His name is Taiwo, I can still remember. He was convinced eventually, and I was fulfilled with a smile on his face because he had put that 20 naira note back in his pocket. As usual, he assured me that God was going to provide that day and that he was going to give me my daily pay when I returned home in the evening. Interestingly, for some reason, Taiwo was always coming to school with the cash everybody had contributed. So I quietly asked him if he could, give all my money back to me, that I was not interested in the contribution again. If I can remember, it was about 210 naira at the time. I gladly presented all of it to my dad when I came home in the evening. And he had a big smile on his face. Of course, he didn't collect it from me. He rather gave me the one he had promised to give me on his return. But guess what? He was so happy that I could be that understanding and willing to inconvenience myself just to make him happy at that tender age. I mean, this was the most selfless man I had ever known.
Sure.
And I was happy he was able to discover somehow that I was not just a son who was only interested in the good times, but also willing to suffer if necessary.
True.
That experience remains one of the most treasured childhood memories of mine. Maybe I'm able to motivate someone here today that God takes note of what you really want.
Yes.
He seeks sons who are not always on the queue of what will you do for me, but always willing to ask, what will you have me do?
Yes.
What you really want determines your position, and your position makes the difference.